I was going through my stuff and I found this, the first book I ever read, like, for myself, I guess. Um, and I figured, hey, it's public domain. I probably won't get sued if I read this shit. So, yeah, without further ado, this is me attempting to read Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. Here's a book. Yeah, that's the stuff. Anyways, Tom Sawyer, A Hymn to Boyhood by Mark Twain, retold by Henry Burke and illustrated by Ian McNee. Anyways, here we go. Introducing Tom. The old lady walked into the room and quickly glanced around. She was hunting for a boy. "Tom," she cried, but there was no answer. "Tom, where have you got to, you scamp?" There was still no answer. She pulled her glasses down and peeped over them, then pushed them up and peeped under them. She would never look through them when she was hunting for the hideaway Tom. Those were her Sunday best glasses. She wouldn't for style, not service. I could see more through a pair of polished pin lids. "You wait till I get a hold of you," the old lady snapped. "I'll..." But she didn't finish the sentence. She was too busy poking under the bed with a broom. All she found was the disgruntled cat. "You take the biscuit, Tom Sawyer," she sighed. The old lady stepped over the open doorway and stared out at the tangle of weeds and tomato plants that made up her back garden. Tom wasn't there, so she filled her lungs with air and boomed, "Hey, Tom, come here." There was a slight noise behind her, and she whirled around just in time to catch a small boy by the collar of his jacket. "I should have known to check that closet," she cried. "What have you been up to in there?" "Nothing," replied the startled boy. "But look at your hands, and look at your mouth. What is that mess?" I wouldn't know, Aunt," Tom gulped. "I reckon I know," she shrieked. "It's my jam. I've told you 40 times to leave my jam alone unless you want a beating. Now pass me the stick." The whipping stick hovered in the air. Tom was in peril. "Look at that," he screamed. "Behind you, Aunt." The old lady spun on her heels, snatching his skirts away from the invisible danger. Fast as a bullet, Tom was out of the house and scrambling over the high garden fence. For a second, his Aunt Polly was too dazzled to speak. Then she broke into a gentle laugh. "That boy foxes me every time. I'm just an old fool who can keep up with all his tricks. He knows how to work my temper up until I want to give him a beating. And then he skips away or makes me laugh and I can think of raising a hand against him. But I'm not doing my duty bringing him up like this. Spare the rod and spoil the child, as the good book says. And Tom's full of the devil already. But he's my dead sister's boy, and I don't have the heart to beat him. It makes me weep when I do, and pays me with guilt when I don't. Well, it's a short life and it's full of suffering. I reckon he's just born for trouble. He'll play hooky from school today, I'll bet. So, I'll make him work tomorrow, even though it's Saturday, and the other boys will be out and playing. I gotta teach him a hard lesson, or I'll be the ruin of that child." Tom did play hooky that afternoon, and he enjoyed every minute of it. He got home just in time for his chores, helping Aunt Polly's slave, Jim, to saw and chop the firewood. In truth, Jim did most of the work, while Tom described his daring adventures. Tom's half-brother, Sidney, had already finished his task of collecting wood chips. He was a quiet boy, and stayed well clear out of any trouble or excitement. While Tom ate his supper, swiping sugar at every opportunity, Aunt Polly began asking him searching questions. She wanted to lure him into admitting an afternoon of school skipping mischief. Like many other simple-hearted souls, she thought she was as crafty as a fox. and mistook her clumsy propping for a marvel of sly cunning. "Tom," she began, "it must have been warm in school today." It was," answered Tom. "Too hot for books, I'll bet." "I suppose it was," he replied. "Didn't you want to go swimming?" This line of questioning made Tom suspicious. He searched Aunt Polly's face for clues, but it was as blank as a poker player's. "Not very much," he said cautiously. The old lady stretched out a hand and touched his shirt cuff. "Is this cloth shirt too warm for you, boy?" While Aunt Polly flattered herself that she checked his shirt for dampness without him knowing, Tom's mind was racing. He'd guessed what she was up to and was plotting how to throw her off the scent. Some of us put our head under the water pump to cool down," he drawled. "Mine's still wet." Aunt Polly kicked herself for not checking Tom's hair before he'd provided this excuse. She was certain he'd been swimming, and hit upon a new tactic for making him confess. "You didn't undo your shirt collar where I suited, Tom. When you went under the water pump? Let me see under your jacket to check the stitching. Let me check under your jacket to see the stitching." Tom smiled and opened his jacket. His shirt collar was securely sewed. "You're off the hook, Tom," she told him. "I was certain you'd be naughty and gone swimming, but I misjudged you." She was sorry that she'd been wrong, and also amazed that Tom had been obedient for once, but then Sydney broke the spell. "It's funny, Aunt," he said, "but I thought you sewed that collar with white thread." "That's right. That's right, I did," stammered the old lady. "Well, it's black now," said Sydney with a smile. Tom didn't wait for the rest. He was out of the door in a flash, only turning to shout, "I'll get you for that, you traitor!" He was safely hidden. Tom examined the 2 needles hidden in his jacket lapel. One was threaded with white cotton, the other with black. "She'd never have noticed," he hissed, "if it hadn't been for that set. But I can never remember if she uses black or white thread. I wish she'd just stick to one and not spoil my schemes. You'll wait, Sid. I'll teach you a lesson." Tom was not the local goody two-shoes, but he knew the boy who was, and he hated him. But in less than 2 minutes, Tom had forgotten all about his despised brother. He had something much more important than to occupy his mind. Whistling. A man in the town had been kind enough to show him how to whistle like a bird, flicking his tongue at the back of his mouth to make a liquid warbling sound. It was hard to master, but Tom was soon striding down the street with his mouth full of music and his heart full of thanks to his teacher. He was as happy as an astronomer discovering a new planet. Indeed, when the boy learns how to whistle like a bird, he experiences a deeper pleasure than any dusty astronomer at his telescope. He feels in control of all the wild rhythms in the world. It was summer and the evening sky was still light. Tom suddenly stopped his whistling. A stranger had appeared before him. A boy slightly larger than our hero, and a newcomer in the shabby riverside village of St. Petersburg was an impressive curiosity. But this boy looked simply astounding. He wore fancy new clothes and a dainty cap, and shoes on his feet, although it wasn't church day. Tom hated church-missed clothes, and loathed any boy who went around town dressed up in them. When there was no need for it, the more Tom stared at this overdressed intruder, the more he resented him. Finally, he announced, "I cannot fight you." "I'd like to see you try it," sneered the stranger. "Well, I can." "No, you can't." "Yes, I can." "Oh, no, you can't." Can't. There was an uncomfortable pause, and then Tom asked, "What's your name, anyways?" "That's none of your business." "I can make it my business." "Let's see you do it." "If you say another word, I will." "Word," said the stranger. "I could beat you with one hand tied behind my back," Tom boasted. "Then do it," cried the other boy. "I might," replied Tom. "Well, get on with it. Well, get on with it. I'm waiting. Don't tempt me. You're afraid. I'm not, snapped Tom. Yes, you are. There was another pause with the boys standing face to face, glowering. Tom pressed his shoulder into the stranger's chest and the stranger pushed back. They struggled until they were both flushed and hot, but neither could get the advantage. Tom stepped back. You're a coward and a dog, spat Tom. I'll tell my big brother and he'll trash you with one finger. I've got a brother too. He's bigger than yours. He'll throw the two of you over that fence. Both these brothers were mythical beasts. You're a liar, cried Tom, and I can still outfight you. Prove it, said the stranger. Tom scratched a line in the dust with his big toe. Step over that line, he growled, and I'll beat you until you can't stand up. The stranger stepped over the line. You gonna fight me or not? He smirked. I am, said Tom. For 2 cents, I'd smack you. The stranger reached into his pocket and took out 2 small coins. Tom knocked them out of his hand, and the next instant the boys were snarling and rolling in the dirt, locked in deadly combat. They tore at each other's noses, hair, and clothes, raging in a cloud of dust. Finally, the fog of war cleared and revealed Tom as the champion. He was sitting on the stranger's chest and punching his face. Say give, shouted Tom. The stranger mumbled a word of shame and Tom let him up. That'll teach you a lesson, said Tom proudly. What should you fill with next time? The beaten boy ran off sobbing, snuffling, and shouting threats about what he'd do to Tom the next time they crossed paths. Tom laughed and turned away. As soon as his back was turned, the vanquished boy picked up a stone and hurled it. The missile hit Tom between the shoulders and the stranger ran like an antelope. Tom chased his enemy all the way to his house. He stomped up and down outside the gate, daring him to come out and fight. The stranger stayed indoors, making faces at Tom through the window. At last, the enemy's mother came out and called Tom a bad, vicious, and vulgar child. He slunk away, still muttering threats behind towards the enemy indoors. Tom got home late and was ambushed by Aunt Polly as he clambered through his open window. Any doubt she'd been having about punishment quickly vanished when he saw the state of his clothes. Tom would spend his Saturday in Kekhteri, toiling under a hot sun. The Happy Artist. Saturday morning was bright and fresh, brimming with life. There was a smile on every face and a spring in every step. Blossoms perfumed the air, and the hills behind the village were lush and green in the morning sun. Tom Sawyer, his face a portrait of despair, stepped into the road with a bucket of whitewash paint and a long-handled brush. He glanced at his poly bare, wooden fence. It was 30 yards long and 9 feet high. Tom groaned. Life seemed hollow and his existence just a chore. He sighed and flicked the brush along the first plank, flicked it twice more, and then took a step back and compared the one lonely whitewashed plank with the hundreds of bare boards stretching away into the distance. Tom sighed and slumped down to the ground. Jim skipped to the gate, carrying a tin bucket and singing a song. Fetching water from the town pump had almost seemed a trial to Tom, but it didn't strike him that way as he leaned against the fence. There would be friends waiting at the pump, a long line of pals all chatting, playing, and skylarking. Tom remembered that Jim always took an hour to get back with the water, even though the pump was no more than a few hours away. And a few houses away. Hey Jim, Tom cried. Let me take the bucket. You can rest yourself here and do a bit of painting. Jim shook his head. I've had special instructions, he said mysteriously. The lady of the house told me not to listen to anything you might have to say about whitewashing. She ordered me to keep moving and get down to the pump. Never mind what she said, pawed Tom. I'll only be gone a minute, and she'll never know about it. I don't dare do it, Tom, replied Jim. She'd give me a beating if she found out. She never beats anybody, laughed Tom. She might give you a telling off, but that doesn't hurt, unless she starts crying. And I've got something for you if you'll help. I'll give you my prize marble. Jim hesitated. It's the best in my collection, Tim cried. That's a pretty marble, no doubt about it, said Jim, admiring the glass orb in Tom's palm. But I can't risk a beating. And I'll even show you my sword too, said Tom. It's about ready to drop off. Jim was too curious to resist this attraction. He put down the bucket and leaned over his thumb and picked the bandage around his toe. But the next second, Jim was flying down the street with his bucket and a tingling behind, and Tom was whitewashing as though his life depended on it. Aunt Polly waved his slipper in the air with a look of triumph. Tom's show of enthusiasm didn't last long. When Aunt Polly disappeared inside the house, he began to think of all the adventures he was missing. The other boys would be walking past any minute, setting out on amazing quests and expeditions. Tom couldn't bear the thought of them making fun of him for working on a Saturday. He examined his pockets to see whether he had the means to pay another boy to do his punishment. But all he discovered were bits of toys, marbles, and trash. Even bribery was beyond him. Though at his darkest and most desperate moment, Tom thought of a scheme that was nothing less than genius. He took up the brush and began working. Ben Forges soon popped up around the corner, jumping on an apple and pretending to be a Mississippi paddle boat. "All hands on deck," he yelled. "Turn your back, river pilot. Something strange floating up ahead." Tom didn't blink. He stared at the fence, making sure each brush stroke was perfect. "Put the paddles in reverse," cried Ben. "What kind of trouble are you in, Tom Sawyer?" Tom said nothing. He scratched his chin, studied the fence, and lifted his brush like an artist at his easel. "What's up?" asked Ben, standing next to him. "Why are you working today?" Tom flicked his head around. Oh, it's you, Ben. I didn't notice you there." "Yes, it's me," laughed Ben. "And I'm going swimming. Bet you wish you could. Or maybe you'd rather spend your Saturdays working." "Who said anything about working?" cried Tom. "Do you call this work?" And he turned back to the fence. "It looks like work to me," said Ben. "Well, it suits me," replied Tom sharply. "Don't pull my leg," laughed Ben. "You can't really mean that you like whitewashing." Does a boy get a chance to paint a fence every day?" Tom said craftily. That put the whole business in a whole new light for Ben. He stopped nibbling at his apple. Can I have a try?" Ben asked. Tom turned slowly to look at him and shook his head. "No," he muttered. I just couldn't do it. Aunt Polly's very fussy about this fence. It's got to be the perfect job of painting. I reckon there's only one boy in 1,000. No, 1 in every 2,000 who could do this job the way she wants it." "Go on, let me try it," cried Ben. "I'd let you have a turn, Tom." "I'd like to, Ben. I would," replied Tom. "But she just wouldn't allow it. Jim wanted to try and she wouldn't let him, and Sid was begging for a turn, but she turned him down. Can't you see the trouble I'd be in if I was to let you step in and you messed it all up for me?" "I'll be careful," bleated Ben. I promise I will. And I'll give you the rest of my apple. Come on." Tom looked thoughtful for a minute, then handed over the brush. Ben set to work, sweating in the sun, while the retired artist sat on the barrel in the shade. He dangled his legs and munched on his apple, waiting like a spider for new victims to flutter into his web. Boys came along to jeer and laugh and stayed to whitewash. When Ben was exhausted, Tom sold the whitewashing job to Billy Fisher for the price of a kite. Johnny Miller was next in line, after surrendering a dead rat and a length of string to swing it on. Hour after hour, the willing victims came to whitewash. Tom was rolling in wealth by the middle of the afternoon. His pockets bulged with the assorted booty of the village boys. Marbles, rusty keys, pieces of chalk, tin soldiers, firecrackers, a brass doorknob, a dog collar, and 4 pieces of an orange peel. Tom had discovered one of the greatest laws of human nature. In order to make a man or a boy long for something, all you have to do is make it hard to come by. And if Tom had been a philosopher and thought carefully about today's events, he would have understood another human truth. Work is everything we are forced to do, and play is everything we choose to do. This truth explains why sleeping under the stars and riding a horse can seem like hard work to a cowboy. But the rich men in the city will hang over their cash if they have a chance to do it. But instead, our hero counted his booty and retreated to headquarters to make his report. Tom found Aunt Polly in the back room of the house, a space that served as a bedroom, breakfast room, dining room, and library. She was sitting by an open window, and the afternoon's gentle breeze had lulled her to sleep. The family cat was asleep too, curled up in her lap. As Tom came in, the old lady stirred and flicked open an eye. "Can I go out and play now, Aunt?" asked Tom. "How much have you done?" She coughed, rubbing her face and reaching for the glasses that rested in her hair for safekeeping. I've done all of it, Aunt. 3 coats thick." "I can't bear it when you lie," replied his aunt, squirming out of her chair. "It's the truth," protested Tom. Aunt Polly decided that she had to test his claim for herself. She would have been satisfied if Tom had finished 1/3 of the fence. So when she saw every single plank had been lavishly whitewashed, she was astonished. "Well, I never. You can work hard when you put your mind to it," she gasped, but then she added, "Not that you put your mind to it very often. Well, get along and play. Make sure you get back at a reasonable hour. Get along and play. But make sure you come back at a reasonable hour, or I'll take my slipper to you. But no, wait 1 second." She was so dazzled by Tom's hard work, she decided to reward him with an apple. "A treat tastes all the better when you find it with hard effort," she told him, wagging her finger and lifting her eyes heavenwards. Tom saw that she wasn't looking and snatched a donut from the jar on the table. Skipping into the garden, Tom spotted Sid, sneaking up the open stairway at the back of the house. The garden was littered with clods of broken earth, and Tom wasted no time launching a barrage against his snake-in-the-grass brother. A hailstorm of clods raged around the trader, and Tom was over the fence before Aunt Polly could interfere. Sid was left bruised and sobbing, while Tom contented himself that justice had been done. Our new hero knew the pathways around his home better than any alley cat, and he was soon safely beyond the reach of capture or punishment. He sauntered toward the main square of the village, where 2 gangs of boys had mustered for a grand battle. Tom was general of the Grand Army. Tom was general of one army, and his close friend, Joe Harper, was the military mastermind of the other. These 2 commanders would not join the battle in person. Instead, they sat together, sending messages to their armies through runners. Tom's army won a great victory, and the commanders counted their dead, exchanged prisoners, and agreed a time and place for the next showdown. Tom was strolling in the direction of home when he saw a new girl in the garden of Jeff Thatcher's house. Her hair was golden yellow, and her eyes were blue as the morning sky. As our hero gulped, and his heart jumped in his chest, he was smitten. But when the blue-eyed angel spotted him swooning on the fence, swooning on the sidewalk, Tom pretended that he hadn't seen her. Instead, he began showing off with a series of gymnastic leaps and bounds, hoping to impress his new love. Despite his best efforts, he noticed her moving towards the porch of the house, and he rushed towards the fence. Tom heaved a great sigh as the angel placed the perfect foot on the first step of the porch. but his face lit up when she tossed the pansy over the fence before disappearing into the house. Tom streaked around to examine the flower, but hesitated before picking it up. He didn't want to appear too eager to seize his lady's love token. After dancing around in the street for a moment, he stretched out a foot and crushed the flower between his toes. Tom hopped away with his treasure and buttoned it inside his jacket, close to his heart. He returned to the fence, and his breathless showing off, but there was no sign of the girl. Tom consoled himself by hoping she had been hiding behind the curtains, watching intently as he finally trotted home. Tom was in high spirits all through supper, and Aunt Polly wondered if he'd caught a fever. She scolded him for hurling clods at Sid, but Tom couldn't stop smiling. He was so lighthearted he reached out to steal some sugar from right under his aunt's nose. She rapped him across the knuckles and Tom yelped. You don't get Sid a whack when he steals some sugar. You don't get Sid a whack when he scoops some sugar, he cried. Sid doesn't drive me to distraction the way you do, she replied. If I didn't keep an eye on you, there'd be no sugar left. When Aunt Polly stepped into the kitchen, Sid smirked and reached for the sugar bowl, but his smug fingers were too slippery, and the bowl went clashing to the floor. Tom was in ecstasy as the bowl broke and Sid left out a sob. He decided to enjoy every second of Sid's agony and wait in silence until he was questioned before turning the band all over for a good beating. Tom could barely contain a whoop of excitement when Aunt Polly came in and began raging over the shattered remains of the bowl. He said to himself, Now the teacher's pet is going to pay. The next second, Tom was sprawling on the floor and Aunt Polly was lifting her hand, ready for a second smack. What are you beating me for? Tom shouted. Sid broke it. Aunt Polly paused for a moment, but instead of apologizing, she only snapped. Well, I'm sure you deceived him. Well, I'm sure you deserved it for some other mischief. Then the old lady's conscience got the better of her, and she yearned to say something kind and loving to our hero. But she had made a promise to be strict according to the boy, and didn't want to reveal any weakness. Tom sulked in the corner. He ignored her friendly glances, choosing instead to wallow in the self-pity of the wrong man. Tom pictured himself on the deathbed, his health fading away because of the injustice he had suffered over his short bowl. His soul was bending over his body, begging him for one word of forgiveness, but Tom turned to face the wall in stony silence. Tom's feeling was so worked up by this daydream, he began to choke with sadness, and a bitter tear trickled down the length of his nose. He decided to take himself away from all happy things and places. So when Mary, his cousin, ran laughing into the room, Tom shuffled out through the back door. Mary had been absent for a week, visiting country friends. She wanted to hug and play with her brothers, but Tom was dreaming of misty crags and desolate heights, sad and gloomy landscapes where he had sunk to glorious depths of despair. He dragged his feet to the river and sat down on a log raft. If only I could drown myself, he thought, without getting too wet or uncomfortable in the process. Then he thought of his precious flower. He stared at the poor wilting pansy, and his gloom increased magnificently. Would you weep for me, he wondered, if they dragged me out of the river? Or would you turn away from me like the rest of this cold, heartless world? At last, he struggled to his feet and walked home in the darkness. On the way, he passed the house of his golden-haired angel and studied every room for a flicker of candlelight. A glow came from an open window on the second floor. Tom climbed the fence and tiptoed across the garden until he was directly below the window. He lay down on the cold earth, clutching the pansy to his chest. This was how he would die, as a poor, gallant knight, pending for his lady. And this was how she would find him, his white fingers, gripping her love token in his innocent face, staring up at the stars. A housemaid shouted, and the bucket load of icy water cascaded over the gallant night. Tom shivered and ran, bolting over the fence as an old boot whizzed past his ear. Sid woke up to see Tom examining his drenched clothes by candlelight. From the look of danger in Tom's eye, he decided it was best to not ask any questions. Tom went to bed without saying his prayers, and Sid made a mental note of his brother's latest sin. So yeah, that was 27 pages. The book is about 120 something, I don't know. Might continue, might not, we'll see. This was it was new-ish for me, I guess. If you liked it, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you later.